think that a lot of what we've been talking about over this convention has been IDW and its place in the fandom. And I think this is a great opportunity to sort of end our comic book talk this week with the man who has spearheaded the relaunch of IDW 2. Please welcome to the stage Mr. Brian Ruckley! Welcome.
Thank you very much. I've got to do more water.
You do that, and I'll actually, you know what, I'll do the same. This is compelling content.
Is it what we come for?
If you want to pay to watch me pour water,
You need a white t-shirt for it.
fortunately, I am deaf, so I completely didn't hear. Right, Brian, thank you so much for coming. We're glad to have you here. First of all, congratulations on completing the run. Thank you. It's a very rare thing to have a single writer helm a Transformers series for that period of time and to be able to tell a complete story. So let's dive right into it. Just for the benefit of those that might not be aware, we did talk about this a little bit in the IDW panel, but can you just give us a brief overview of the genesis of this project?
Yeah, sure. I always feel bad saying this because I've said it several times in panels and podcasts and stuff. I know there's always people around who don't know. I was a novelist. Well, at a certain point in my career, I stopped having a proper career and became a novelist, and got contacted by IDW, and a particular editor at IDW, because of the novels I'd written, which he was a fan of, and got brought in to do a couple of comics actually over a few years. I did Rogue Trooper for them, and I did Highlander comics for them. And then was at a bit of a loose end and got an email from them asking if I was interested in Transformers, which I was, and I was, full disclosure, I wasn't a hardcore Transformer fan, exactly in the way that so many people here are, but I was a casual fan of Transformers because, you know, I incline that nerdy, geeky way, I guess. So I knew Transformers, and I enjoyed Transformers content and stuff, and I was a very big fan of the previous IDW continuity with John Barber and James Roberts. I loved those comics because what I've always been since I was a young teenager is a big comics fan. So I got invited in just to pitch. What turned out to be, I didn't realise initially, but it turned out to be a total clean slate relaunch, reboot of the whole IDW Transformers universe, which I probably should have been a bit more intimidated by than I was, but I did understand it was quite a big deal and so on. And wasn't what I was expecting to get asked to pitch for. And then, over a quite protracted period of much backwards and forwards thing, I obviously got the gig, and that was, I don't know, the first comic came out March 2019, I think, something like that. Yeah, and so I was writing them, whatever, 6 months before that, so it's been 4 years basically now. And yeah, it's a privilege to get to spend that much time writing that. It's tiring, but it's a tiring privilege to write that many comics continuously in one world with one continuity and so on.
So, now issue 53?
No, there's 43 issues of the main series.
Yeah, and then
there's a one-shot and an annual and a couple of mini-series on the side, so it adds up to 50 something.
So, yeah. So all of those issues down. I'm curious because right from the offset, it was clear that long-form storytelling was on the table. You know, it starts with the murder, and it just goes on from there. All the way to the end, how much of it was planned out at the beginning?
So I'm a slightly atypical writer in some respects, probably, because I have no notes, essentially, so I couldn't actually show you any paper or any document on the computer or anything that spells it out all the way to the end. But even when I was writing novels, my approach to world building was more having a clear, it's always been really, having a clear sense of the basic beats of the world and the story, and kind of dancing around them and feeding them in gradually, and not going with the flow. That's the wrong thing to say, because I have targets and things I want to convey, but I knew the major breaks in the story, if you like, the landmarks that I was going for, and wriggling around to get from one to the next was quite often more improvised than it looks. Not always, but quite often more improvised, which actually turns out to be not that bad a way of writing a long run on a comic when you're subject to other influences like editorial and, you know, Hasbro and so on, because it builds in a bit of flexibility, which lets you accommodate changes or shifts in direction, that kind of thing.
So what sort of mandates were you given throughout the course of the run? We always hear about, we want you to spotlight this character or focus on this character, but your series you could just draw from a wide, you know, slot of different continuities and toy lines and things like that.
Yeah, that's mostly me just coming in and thinking, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have some fun, so I'm going to very consciously go and mine the back catalogue of characters who I like and who I think haven't had anything particularly interesting done with them in a lot of cases, or who I have a particular idea. I mean, the truth is, at the very start, right at the very beginning of the process, there was no mandate on anything other than we're going back to square one, it's a blank slate, do something a bit different from what's seen before in Transformers. You know, give us a bit of a different approach and feel, and do it in a pre-war setting. That was kind of not exactly a firm mandate, but that was the request. Now it didn't stay quite like that as things progressed and everything went on. So there were, at various points, there were things that came in to, you know, people saying, actually it'd be quite good if you did such and such thing, or instead of using that character, use that character, blah, blah, blah. And don't do that, because that's not something we actually want to do on reflection. But initially, at the very start, there was no mandates at all.
And was the goal always to get them to sort of the Exodus? Was that, obviously, we know IDW is no longer going to be the license holder. Obviously, we knew the comics were going to get wrapped up. But what was your intention? Just, I want to get to the Exodus. That's the story I want to tell.
No. That became the goal once the license was going, and once various other factors a bit early on came into play. But because there was no mandate, very little instruction early on, it was originally conceived as totally open-ended. So that in theory, you know, I think it'd be bad for me and bad for the comic and bad for the readers, but I could have kept going indefinitely with that story, shooting for certain, you know, more and more escalating, diverging landmarks that were at the back of my mind as options always. But to be honest, I could have, certainly when I started, the war, full-on-ish war on Cybertron, I had penciled in to start earlier than it did, because I think, broadly speaking, I think around issue 25. There's a double-sized issue, I think issue 25, I think would really kick off in a significant way with Megatron storming the Senate and all this kind of thing. And that could have come and was originally planned to come a bit earlier. The Exodus because the Exodus is kind of one of those landmarks, so obviously you've got in my head to target somewhere to get to. And that could have come earlier. The need for various reasons to do with scheduling and Hasbro input and editorial decisions. These things get shifted in time. They're kind of a moving target as you're working your way through the series. So I've got a ton of stuff I could have done with space stories of them off in space after the Exodus and things like that. The one thing, since one or two people have asked me, the one thing I might have been told to do it, the one thing I was never going to do, in my mind, was take them to Earth. I always vaguely thought that if someone decided we wanted humans in it, I would try and persuade them that the way to do it was having humans coming out into space and meeting the Transformers in space rather than the Transformers going to Earth. But obviously that was way down the track if we ever got there.
Is that just because you feel like that's ground that's been, walked before?
Yeah. I'm not doing anything spectacularly revolutionary or anything in this series, but I'm from the very start with IDW's blessing and stuff. I was always every step of the way trying to maintain the balance between what's familiar to people and what's recognisable and what they want to see, but either doing it in a slightly different way or inserting details and some sort of story turns and character turns in it that, if not necessarily they've never been done before, but they at least have a slightly different flavour and a different take on established things. So, Transformers on Earth, I like those stories as much as anyone, but I'm not sure the world needs more of that unless someone's got a really distinctive new take on it, sort of thing.
One thing I think it's really important to mention here as part of your series, and I don't know if anybody's got their camera out or something like that, and they like to take videos and post them on Twitter and stuff, but I think if we're talking about your run, we have to talk about Annie.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you've done?
I got a bit worried there when you said there was going to be videos.
I just hope she gets to see it, that's all.
Yeah, so Anna, I'm sure some of you were at the panel yesterday where I said that I think, in a way, this is going to sound terribly cheesy, I genuinely think, in a way, I'm the wrong person to be sitting up here talking about this, certainly on my own. That's not the way I would want to do it, because I think the best thing to come out of this run is Anna Markova. I never quite know how obvious it is if you're not kind of in the business and involved as a writer and artist. I think it's probably kind of obvious, but I'm never sure. But to do what Anna did, to come out of the fan community and to become the lead artist essentially on this series, obviously there are a bunch of amazing artists on it, but Anna did more than anyone else in the end, I think. And for her to come from not really having done comics before and to incredibly quickly develop into an extraordinarily talented graphic storyteller as distinct from an artist, but just in terms of her control of the page and the detail and the acting and the narrative flow in the way she tells a story graphically is extraordinary. And I know, obviously, there's talk behind the scenes. I know that I'm not the owner thinks this, and was blown away by what she did on the series. So in a lot of ways, I hope that, nobody knows what the future of the Transformers comics franchise holds, but I hope if the series is remembered for anything, in a lot of ways, I hope it will be remembered for the series where Alan Walkover came to the fore and was recognised as a properly top-level Transformers artist.
Couldn't agree more. So I'm going to do like a massive U-turn from that, lovely sentiment and ask you a question, which I've already asked you in private, but I just think it's funny. How much do you hate the Enigma of combination? Because let's be honest, it gets introduced in a mini-series, you don't reference it, and then when you finally get it, it's chuck it in the sea.
Yeah, well, but I was never going to do, certainly not early on, I was never going to do very much with any of the artifacts. Because I was treading quite lightly in terms of the mythology and the lore and the deep history of it all. It was all there in my head, and I knew it all and how it all fitted together. But I was dribbling it in very carefully and slowly. But obviously the Enigma shows up in the Constructicon issues in Galaxies, in the companion series, and particularly as we got towards the end of the series, I did want to try and embrace as much as possible of what other people had written in that continuity and tie it back. So I knew the Enigma would be coming back. And I did want to have, I know it sounds trite, but I did want to have combiners fighting each other. And I'd always wanted to get the Technobots and Computron in there because for some inexplicable reason that they happen to be my favourite combiner team, which I'm not sure many people share that view. But
Yeah!
So I knew I was going to have them, and I knew I wanted to make Scattershot into a special character who could actually combine with anybody and pull together bigger robots into a mega combiner. But I didn't want loads and loads of combiners running around, particularly. So I threw it into the Rust Seed. Partly because I really liked the idea, my conception of the Rust Seed was something that gave me a lot of pleasure of just all these rust worms going around eating everything and stuff. But I didn't specify that I deliberately didn't specify that it was destroyed in there.
No.
So, it would have come back at some point.
And obviously that turned into one of the real threats towards the end of the series was the idea that, as a result of that, the Rust Seed was expanding and it was, again something that, became an obstacle, so always good storytelling.
Well, there's an element of it, back to this thing of maybe it's just, I've written quite a lot of stuff in quite a lot of media, and you end up, eventually, touch wood, you reach a point where you trust yourself to be able to improvise connections and story threads to a certain extent. So when I first introduced that version of the Rust Seed, I knew it was going to be a big deal. I knew I was going to do something like that with it, but I didn't know quite how it would play out in the very end. So there's a certain degree of jamming in there as much as planning.
One other thing that I really liked about those series, which was started in the original continuity, but you really brought it forward, was just the amount of incredible strong female Transformers that you had in your run. Was that a conscious decision, something that you wanted to do right from the offset? Because, I think there was probably more female Transformers in your run than in previous ones, and certainly in much more pivotal positions.
That was certainly my plan, was to have more female Transformers than anyone had ever done. Because I totally understand, so I'm absolutely not knocking anyone here, because I God's sake, stop messing about with it and worrying about explanations and, you know, trying workarounds and stuff, and just say, look, there's loads of them. They're just a normal part of the fabric of society, because why wouldn't they be? Because, you know, there aren't rules. So I very literally, this makes it sound more mechanical than it is, I very literally did have a list. I said I didn't have notes before. I did have a list of every female transformer I could find on the internet, on, you know, TF.Wiki. Well, I was scavenging female transformers from everywhere and just trying to work out which ones I could use and which ones I thought would fit and which ones resonated with me and all this sort of thing.
We're going to get some questions. Okay, we've definitely got hands up.
I have one question. I don't know if it's responsive or not, but why in IW was Starscream treated so badly? He's literally said to come punch you back.
Nobody likes Starscream.
Raise your hand if you're a Starscream fan.
Raise your hand if you want to come back next year.
I shouldn't be treated like this. I'm Starscream, the rightful leader of the Decepticons.
You may be doing the feed, yeah.
I'm not sure I treated him that badly, really. I mean, well, yeah, but he, I mean, you're right, there is a bit of a tradition of treating Starscream badly. I will start, there are a whole bunch of characters in the run, for obvious reasons, that I didn't get to go quite as far with or do some of the things I had in mind for them as fully as I would have liked. And I know this is no comfort at all, but Starscream, if it had carried on, this is a good get-out clause for any difficult question, actually. If it had carried on, Starscream was going to come back to the fore a bit more, because I kind of introduced him, and then when it became obvious it wasn't going to be time to go all the way with some of the stuff I had in mind with him, he did become a bit more of a supporting character. But he was going to, the original idea was he was going to come back and be quite a big player and not a punching bag. So that's the best I can say to that, probably.
It always struck me with Starscream in that book that Megatron always knew just how dangerous he was.
Yeah, I mean, part of the idea with Starscream was that he was going to be the character that basically nobody could really trust, and who was not actually really on anybody's side. So actually, I mean, Hasbro probably would have vetoed this, but I was really originally going for a Starscream who wasn't really a Decepticon and wasn't really an Autobot. And everyone kind of knew they couldn't trust him, but sort of wound up unable to help themselves and sort of got charmed by him or manipulated by him or moved into positions where he could mess with people. But yeah, it didn't quite come to fruition like that, the way things worked out.
A couple of hands down here.
This is kind of two questions. Firstly, the big one, in War's End, was a lot of the stuff with his art shown. You know, he went into space, he came back bonkers, and developed to sort of split his consciousness into three bodies. And you know, there's a bit in War's End where he sort of rants about, you know, he found the quintessence or something. Was that deliberately or not building up to an appearance from the Quintessence down the line?
Yes. Well, yeah, I say yes. I don't know whether Hasbro would have let me do what I wanted to do with the Quintessence, but given that obviously by then I knew the series was coming to an end, I thought, sod it, I'm going to put it in, and if they want me to take it out, I will. But yeah, the idea was that Quintessence was a zone of space sort of by, you know, electrical energy and by destroying anyone who tried to get into it, behind which nobody knew what exactly was there. But what was there was my version of the quintessence. But I say, Hasbro might not let me do it because I didn't want them to have anything to do with the past history or anything of Cybertron. So I was trying to do something a bit different.
The second one, and this is a bit small, this is a much more question, was your interpretation of Skywalker, which I found very radically different to the incarnation's character that most of us are familiar with. Was he, consciously or not, based on John Sims' interpretation of the Master? Because I, reading some of his dialogue, I got that vibe.
That's interesting. No, he wasn't consciously based on that. I mean, to be honest, Skywalker was just, I happen to like teleporting Transformers, which is why Jumpstream and Skywalker are in there. And to be honest, that was just me having fun, because I figured I wanted a trickster character, basically, a sort of archetypical trickster. And I thought Skywalker fitted that.
Just down here.
Hello. Just wondering, Cyclonus, when he had his ghost of his dead friends, is there anywhere that came from inspiration-wise, or just something fun you thought of?
It's always very unsatisfying half the time when you ask writers stuff. I just thought of it, yeah. I thought, what? Because obviously I love the Cyclonus character in the previous continuity. He was one of my favourite characters. And I knew, in fact, he was one of the relatively few really significant characters, certainly from the later stages of the previous continuity, that I knew I wanted to have quite central in my run. But I was very consciously trying to look for relatively simple hooks for the particular characters I was going to focus on at some point. And unfortunately for him, one of the things I wanted to have in the series was a sense of individual and societal trauma cast from the past, casting a shadow over the future. So I very cruelly volunteered Cyclonus to be an embodiment of past trauma. And I just, you know, wherever it came from, I don't know, I thought I could visualise that trauma by having his dead friends as ghosts there.
Two-part question. First, why did you decide to use Springer in the way you did?
Springer was that. I decided to use Springer at all because he's one of my favourite Transformers.
Good choice.
And then, see, I'm very big, possibly because I'm not a super hardcore fan. The ones I like tend to be for fairly simple, straightforward reasons. So I like teleporters, I like female Transformers, I like triple changes or multi-changes. Which is how Six Shot ended up in there as well. So I really like Springer, and I wanted him in there originally essentially just as somebody who was competent and surrounded by somewhat less competent people. Because I think one of the great pleasures of, well, this may be a very personal thing, one of the pleasures of Transformers to me is that there are these super powerful beings who just habitually go around making bad decisions, making mistakes, and doing obviously inadvisable things. So I wanted to have various characters in there who were actually just straightforwardly really quite good for what they were supposed to be doing, and who all the less good characters could kind of orbit around. So that's kind of what Springer was in there to do. And to be honest, he's another character where I would have liked
thought, nah, I can't do that, or have to go send that?
Yes, that's interesting you asked that. There were actually going to be, not loads, but there were going to be more fatalities. But the more time you spend with characters, the harder it does, if you're engaged with it, if you actually care about it, the harder it does become to kill them without feeling like you're being horribly cynical. But also, because obviously I knew that the series was going to come to an end considerably before the public, and as soon as I knew that I had a limited time on it, I actually made a conscious decision that basically I think it was one character I killed after I knew that I can think of off the top of my head, but I basically decided I wasn't going to kill anyone after that, because I didn't think it was fair if the continuity wasn't going to continue in a really long running sense that would enable you to contextualise or justify deaths narratively or emotionally. I didn't think it would be fair to start killing off a load of characters in the last few issues, just because everybody's somebody's favourite, I think, probably. And it just feels gratuitous at that point.
So, can you take from that, you're talking about your favourite characters and you're not wanting to kill people off, so you must really hate Brainstorm then.
No, brainstorm's a bit of a mistake on my part, but he's terribly unfortunate where he's a semi-random choice, because I said in my initial pitch I wanted to have a death in the first issue, and I needed the death of a scientifically or technically inclined character for the context of how it was happening. And I didn't have any view on who that should be, really. So I suggested a few names, 2 or 3 names, more or less at random. And they just said, yes, you can kill Brainstorm, so I did. There's not much more to that. I genuinely sort of wish I hadn't.
No friends going in that hand yet.
I always wondered, correct me if I'm wrong, but we never saw his body.
No.
And I always wondered whether or not there was any bait and switch plan ever. Because it always seemed like it was obviously quite a shocking death at the beginning, and it was the impetus for the entire story. And I'm not suggesting that Brainstorm had a giant elaborate plan, like we did the last time, but was that ever a consideration?
No, I'm not really. It pays as a writer to be aware of your own limitations, which I'm fairly acutely aware of. I think I said yesterday as well, writers and artists tend to be their own harshest critic. One of the things, I'm not super good at super dramatic, totally unexpected twists, and I'm not that good or that big a fan of bait and switch. So I tend not to do. I'm just thinking if I'm digging myself a hole, if there is a horrible bait and switch somewhere in the series, but I don't think there is.
I think we've got some questions. One down here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't see you. Come on, you next.
Some inspiration around characters, geologists, geometers. What was the inspiration around that character? It was a funny character for cigarettes.
So I was very limited in the number of new. I mean, this kind of became a bit of a mandate, I suppose, down the line. I was very limited in the number of new characters I could introduce to the series, just because, Hasbro or whoever weren't that keen on. I don't know actually. I don't know whether it was a reaction to the previous continuity that had quite a lot of effect of the new characters in it. But they didn't want too many IDW original characters floating around. And to be honest, I didn't particularly either. So I think without exception, any new character I did introduce was there for a fairly specific reason that I just in the way they see the world and interact. Some quite big characters actually, although I don't know whether it ever came through all that much. But I wanted to have a character who could actually indicate that that was a possibility in this universe. So I came up with Geomotus, who I think I specified is, I said he was a geologist and said something about what his alt mode was and stuff. But I've got to say, I really loved the design. It was Angelo Hernandez who came up with the design. I really liked the design just because it was just a bit different from your kind of bog standard humanoid transformer, which is one of the other factors that influenced my selection of a wide range of characters to introduce, because I'm quite drawn to the ones that have interesting, unusual designs that are, because they just kind of diversify the visual look of the series a bit.
And I love the shoes.
Yeah, I quite like that too.
Yeah.
Just as someone with anxiety issues, I'm sure there's some more people here that may be worse than myself. Thank you for the part at the end with a lot of subsea.
I love subsea bits. Subsea is only in there because of TF Wiki. I had never heard of subsea. And at some point I just stumbled across him on TF Wiki, and I loved his slightly silly design. That Anamorkova then turned into this beautifully updated, sort of very endearing design.
Yeah, I think he was like doing a couple of issues of Marvel UK. Just sounds to feel like possibly he might be a breakout character from a very obscure character on your writing that he might become a bit fan favourite for some.
That would be great. I mean, I've got enormous affection for him, and there's a lot of characters in there, mostly the quite obscure characters that I sort of went and hunted and gathered from the Transformers universe and was able to do things with. There's a bunch of them, like, Subsea, Flame War, blah blah blah, lots of them. But to be honest, I would have been perfectly happy if someone had just said, just take these 10 characters and just send them off into space and we'll just follow them around and see what they're up to. Because in a lot of ways, those are the kind of characters that gave me the most pleasure.
Excellent. Yeah, got a hand there.
So, with the run being cut short, what idea do you most regret not being able to get around to actually put on the page?
Well, I would have quite liked to print out some stuff if they'd let me do it. To be honest, there's not a specific, well, actually, as soon as you say that, I can think of one or two. So I'll say two things. One, it's not really a specific idea, just in bigger picture terms. It's in there, it's in the series, so that's fine, I'm happy with it. But I'm very engaged with the idea of what actually the rest of the universe sees when they look at Transformers, as opposed to what the Transformers think about themselves inside their heads, sort of thing. So I would really have quite liked to do stuff in space that was tied up with that idea of actually these are effing terrifying giant robots that come and stamp around on your planet and are bigger than everything else and can change shape. And surely to God, every organic species on the planet seeing that would be in an absolute panic and sort of horrified at what they've seen. But the one that is related to it is the space stuff. What became the annual with Bludgeon and Thunderwing, where I introduced the tech box actually, that's actually a highly compressed, simplified version of a much longer, more substantial pitch involved the Terracons and a lot more Arachnid and all that sort of stuff. So there is a bunch of stuff tied up with that. Adventures in space with people like Thunderwing kind of becoming their own independent warlords as centralized authorities
Yeah.
Okay, so what is your favourite story and character and why?
That I wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah. My favourite character is probably Flame War. That's what I usually say, and it's true. I mean, when I say that, most people say they can see that I was having fun writing her, and that's true. My favourite stories tend to be the thing with, particularly when you've got this volume of work, the more you write, the bigger the thing you're trying to judge gets, the harder it becomes to be entirely satisfied with it. So my favourite stuff tends to be particular issues. So things like the standalone issues, which I think ended up being 6, 12, 18, 24. There's some of them, actually there's a few other issues. Them and the issue where Vigilem goes up against Lodestar and pulls down the tether on the moon. And issue 25, the double one, where Megatron kind of goes and shouts at the Senate and then they storm it. So there's single issues like that where they're semi-self-contained, and I can look at them and think that whatever my shortcomings as a writer, those particular issues were about as good as I could do with the idea I had for what that issue was. So they're the ones that, I end up most satisfied with.
Fantastic. Good question. Here first.
Hi, so love your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
So can you talk a little bit about your interest in sort of unusual animals and ecosystems and things, and how that played into how you developed kind of the larger universe? Because that was the thing that really struck me about your thing, is sort of all of these new creatures and the interactions and kind of like we were talking about the wider universe.
So for those who don't know, I do a podcast called The Wild Episode about nature and wild animals and wildlife and zoology and stuff, because that's my, if you go back to before I was a writer, I was an environmentalist and I worked in nature conservation, and that's what my degrees were in and stuff. So that's, that's usually, stuff is usually quite top of mind for me. I very consciously wanted to, I kind of wanted to do more than I actually did. But I very consciously wanted to have Cybertron be a place where there was organic life that may not have been there all the time, but had been there for a very long time and was part of the landscape. And obviously, with the way the story develops, you then have Transformers leaving Cybertron and going out into places that are intrinsically organic. So the metallic Transformers become the alien species, if you like, going into that environment and looking at how that ties up or what reaction that causes was the kind of thing I was quite interested in pursuing. But the other thing I just wanted to do was things like the Void, which are probably my favourite of the alien species I had in the past. It's probably obvious to people, they're derived from the squids we have on Earth and stuff. And one of the things I was interested in doing was looking at real strange animals in this world and actually turning them into sentient alien species and having them float around and bounce off the Transformers and stuff as well.
That was great, thank you.
We have time for one more question. There's a gentleman here at the front.
Has doing Transformers changed the way you approach writing generally?
That's a good question. That's a potentially long answer, so I'll keep it short. It's changed the way it's confirmed one thing I already knew, or at least strongly suspected, which is that, I've had a few novels published, and I've written a bunch of short stories and stuff. I've now written, not loads, reasonable number of comics. And it's confirmed what I suspected, which is that I like writing comics so much more than I like writing prose. So I'm not saying I'm financially able to do it, but if I had my choice, I would never write another novel or anything like that, and just write comics. I mean, it's changed the way, as I said, writers tend to be quite aware and sensitive to their limitations. It's changed the way, see, I don't even know if I would attempt to do it again, but it's changed my attitude slightly to long-form comics writing, because I was kind of asked to do it, was the truth, but I didn't really set out to write something that would read better in trade than in single issues. But I was generally moved in that direction a bit, and I think I learned that there's a lot more to making it work in single issues as distinct from the trade than even someone who's thought about it quite a lot and had written previous comics realised. So if I do get another shot at long-form writing, I hope it would show that I've got the single issue thing down a bit more consistently, because as I say, there's a whole bunch of issues in there that I'm very pleased with, but there's others not quite so much.
That's lovely, and I think that's a great place to stop. But before we do wrap up, I'm just wondering, you've mentioned a couple of times there your love of comics. I'm just wondering if there's anything you're reading at the minute that you're particularly loving?
Okay, no. There is, the sad truth is, I've still got a huge collection of comics. I stopped reading virtually all comics a few years ago now, partly for reasons of expense and partly because, certainly as far as the superhero comics were going, they kind of lost me. The various creative decisions made by certain companies have kind of left me in no wake and I fell off. So I do read a certain amount of stuff digitally. The only comic I would claim to be seriously up to date on, and this purely because he's my favourite character and I'm addicted, is Daredevil.
Good book right now.
Yes, it's quite a good book. Historically, it's probably the most consistent superhero comic, I think, in terms of quality, but that's just me. So, Daredevil.
Go on then. Right! Thanks for spending time with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll try that again. Mr. Brian Ruckley!